Hey everyone, welcome to this week's session. This week we're going to explore dynamics of group and intergroup relations in the workplace. Now, whether you're part of a team project, you're leading a department, or even navigating, cross-functional collaboration, your ability to understand group behavior is essential for organizational success. And this chapter 9 of the text, is going to help us answer some key questions. First, what makes a group effective? Second, why do people behave differently in groups than they do alone? And then finally, how can we manage group dynamics to drive performance instead of conflict? We'll look at things like group norms, we'll look at roles and status systems and how those shape behavior, sometimes helping teams stay focused around a common goal, and how managers can create the right conditions for that to happen. And then we'll zoom out and we'll talk about intergroup relations. So what happens when teams or departments interact? We'll talk through and examine maybe some common barriers to cooperation and learn how we can reduce conflict, build trust, and really tap into the full power of collective action across groups. With that, here's something to reflect on. Think about a time where you were really a part of a strong, united group. Think about that and think about what it was that made it work. On the flip side, think of a time where there was tension that existed between teams. What made that collaboration difficult? So again, hopefully by the end of this session, you'll have some of the tools to analyze group dynamics and reduce some intergroup friction and foster collaboration to enhance, motivation and performance. Now that we've kind of introduced the idea of group and intergroup dynamics, I want to take a closer look at what we actually mean by group. How do we define that, right? And why does this matter so much in the workplace? When we talk about a work group, we're really referring to a collection of individuals who interact regularly, they have defined roles, they share norms, and are working toward a common goal. This could be anything from a customer service team to a cross-functional product launch team or project team of some sort. I'll give you an example of some formal and informal groups because that exists in organizations. A formal group might be something like the marketing department at a company or the HR department at a company. It is established by the organization. It has a specific purpose. Everyone has a defined role. Now, if we want to contrast that with an informal group, maybe a group of employees who eat lunch together, right, every day, they bounce ideas off one another, thought partners, right? That group wasn't necessarily created by HR or management, but it still has a strong influence on how work gets done and how people feel at work. We can also look at how long groups are intended to last. There are permanent groups and temporary groups. So permanent groups, like I mentioned, that marketing group, maybe a finance team, they exist for the long haul. But temporary groups, these you could think of as task forces or project teams. They form for a specific purpose and then they kind of dissolve when that job is done. So why do people join groups in the first place? Some join for social connection, especially if there's those informal groups, right? Others are really looking for security or affirmation. Some are actually driven by the opportunity to influence decisions or be a part of something meaningful, something bigger than themselves. And sometimes, let's be honest, it's just because that's where the people closest to your desk sit. Understanding the why behind group formation really gives us insight into how people behave in the group and how we as leaders or collaborators can make those dynamics work for us instead of against us. Now, let's talk a little bit about what happens when groups are formed. Let's talk about norms, roles, status, and even group size and how that can shape behavior and performance. Now, every effective group needs clarity on who does what. Think of roles as expected behavior patterns tied to a position. These generally fall into three types of roles. There are task-oriented roles. So task-oriented roles focus on the work itself, like a coordinator or a recorder that's managing logistics or taking notes in the meeting. There are relations-oriented roles, and those roles really support group harmony. So it could be a mediator, it could be an encourager that helps to resolve some tensions. And then there are those self-oriented roles, and that reflects individual self-interest. someone dominating discussions, or lobbying for personal gain. And that can often hinder an entire team. So an example in a project team, one person may lead the timeline, which is the task. Another will check in daily on the morale, that's the relations. And a fourth may push personal ideas without considering others. That is self-oriented. Role imbalance like this can actually lead to conflict or disengagement. Now, group size also matters. Large groups may suffer from communication breakdown, even lower cohesion, especially in blue collar settings. Absenteeism tends to increase as group size grows. An example of this could be, you have a local church mission team of maybe 4 and they communicate well and they stay cohesive. But a church-wide team of 20 may muddle communication and maybe not everyone feels as engaged. The third thing I want to talk about are norms. And what are norms? These are the unwritten rules. It is a shared standard for acceptable behavior. They simplify expectations and really regulate how we act publicly, not privately. For instance, a norm might discourage interruptions in meetings or encourage open brainstorming, right? Only after scheduled times. So an example of this could be in a study group. Members may agree not to check phones during the group discussion. That norm actually will help the group to maintain focus and also maintain respect. Now, status systems, what are those? Status refers to the perceived ranking within a group. It's often based on experience, gender, or tenure. It creates this kind of pecking order, but it's only effective if members see the status as earned. So suppose someone with less experience speaks up in meetings, but then is ignored because senior members dominate. I hear that at work, in my workplace all the time, is I have something to say, but there are louder voices in the room. When that happens, that actually discourages participation and undermines collective input. So those are things that you want to really keep top of mind. Finally, group cohesiveness. Cohesiveness is how strongly members feel connected or committed to that group. High cohesion boosts motivation, satisfaction, and willingness to stay. But too much cohesion can also stifle creativity. So you have to keep that top of mind as well. An example of this could be you're in a startup team and you share a mission and vision. Often, when you share that mission and vision, you often stay together, right? You work more effectively. But if you get too comfortable in that, some group members may actually resist necessary change. Reflection time. As you think through the groups that you've been a part of, what role do you naturally adopt in your groups? Are you typically more task driven? Are you a team harmonizer? Are you someone with your own agenda? How big is your typical group? Does that size create clarity? Does it create confusion? Think about the norms, right? What group norms exist around you in the groups that you've worked with or that you are currently working with? Those norms, whether it's spoken or unspoken, is there clear status structure? Does it lift people up? Does it shut people down? And do you experience group cohesion, right? Does it push the group forward or does it hold you back? So as we move forward, you'll see how some of these structural dimensions will shape group processes, right? Like communication, adherence to those norms, and even collective performance. So managing effective work groups, how can managers really cultivate groups that are not only productive, but sustainable, satisfying for their members, and capable of working together again? Effective groups aren't just about getting things done today, but they set the stage for success tomorrow. Now, there are 3 criteria for group effectiveness, and it draws on Hartmann and Morris. And the first is productive output. So teams must meet or exceed the standards that are set by the organization. The second is going to be personal need satisfaction. Being a part of a team, and it doesn't matter where this is, any part of a team that you're with, it should be rewarding, whether it's growth, whether it's belonging. We talked about, Maslow, we talked about, the ERG model a few videos ago, but it could be growth, it could be belonging, it could be recognition or purpose. And then the third one is capacity for future cooperation. Teams should use processes that are going to help them work well together in the future and not wear each other down. An example, a well-managed project team may not only finish on time and within the budget, but also leaves members feeling like they've really contributed, right? Feeling valued, feeling confident for the next project, maybe excited, rather than burned out or disengaged. What drives effectiveness? Managers can help to shape group performance by focusing on three core inputs. The first being group effort, right? This is the collective energy and commitment that team members dedicate. The second is through group knowledge and skills. This is the range of expertise, training, and experience the group brings. So you want to have a dynamic team. And then the third is task performance strategy. So how well the teams plan, how well they problem solve, and actually coordinate. So if you think of a hospital setting, you may look at an emergency response team where each member brings medical expertise, right? Those are the skills that I mentioned. Maybe they work tirelessly under pressure. Those are ones that are focused right here on the effort and then follow well-practiced protocols, the strategy. And that results because you have all these specialties and commitments, it could result in high performance, especially in stressful situations, such as being part of an emergency response team at a hospital. But it is important to note that it's not enough to just have skill and effort. Teams should and must avoid destructive social dynamics. Things like social loafing, meaning you're just there, but you're not really adding anything to it. You're just kind of hanging out, or even conflict bottlenecks to build long-term, performance capacity. So when one team member consistently, let's say, pushes aside their responsibilities, hoping that others are going to pick up the slack and cover for them, that is social loafing. I just mentioned that. So if you are a manager, it's important if you recognize this or somebody else in the team comes forward to talk about it with you, that you address it early. You want to clarify accountability and individuals' contributions because that can help to redirect some of the energy into productive group effort. So when leaders, design teams thoughtfully, focusing not just on the assigned tasks, but also on relationships and future cooperation, it can help to elevate performance and actually long-term org capability. So intergroup dynamics. In virtually any real organization, groups don't work in isolation, right? Production must align with sales. HR supports operations. Finance intersects with marketing. Effective intergroup coordination is essential for, seamless productivity and also for competitiveness. However, when groups fail to cooperate, and this is a thing, this happens, the results can be silos. It could be duplicated work, missed opportunities, and even internal conflict. So how do we actively manage some of these dynamics? Let's talk about common barriers to cooperation. The first thing are conflicting goals at times, right? We have conflicting goals. When groups have these competing objectives, let's say, sales is pushing for volume, but finance is pushing for cost control. This leads to tension or rigidity in the process. And this is the essence of realistic conflict theory, okay? Where competition over limited resources oftentimes triggers friction. The second, barrier to cooperation is the lack of interdependence, right? So when teams don't depend on or communicate with one another, they don't engage, right? Interdependence is shared responsibility for tasks or outcomes, right? When you can be really interdependent, you create cooperation and lower relationship conflict while boosting performance. And the third common barrier is intergroup anxiety and threat. Members actually may avoid working with one another and interacting due to anxiety or perception that the outgroup threatens their values or resources. And this fosters, oftentimes stereotyping and avoidance behavior. And you'll see that in groups. So there are some strategies that we can use to improve intergroup relations. The first is with superordinate goals, right? Foster a shared challenge that requires collaboration. Maybe it's launching a company-wide initiative that goes beyond some of the department boundaries, okay? There's a social psychologist, Sheriff, that observed that groups who rallied together when faced with unified goals were much more successful. So when different teams jointly work toward a, let's say a sustainability initiative, they'll move from competition to collaboration. There is also structured intergroup contact. So encouraging positive, purposeful interaction between diverse groups, especially with social activities or shared tasks, can oftentimes reduce bias and build trust. And then the other strategy to improve intergroup relations is really through highlighting the complex shared identity, which is really important, emphasizing unity and diversity, right? Defining a group identity that recognizes its internal differences up front often reduces in-group projection and intergroup bias. Now, as managers, you want to do a couple of things with this. You want to clarify overlapping goals and remove some of those zero-sum perceptions. Increase task interdependence, right? Design workflows that will compel collaboration and facilitate structured contact and shared identity building exercises. That helps a lot to break down walls before they form. Tomorrow, I'm actually going to be joining one of our leaders' team meetings where we are going to focus on doing two exercises that are going to help foster team dynamics and team effectiveness. And these will be experiential, hands-on learning experiences that will tie together to the broader outcome and what he's trying to achieve. So I'm looking forward to that, but those are those identity building exercises to break walls down before they form. Now, intergroup friction isn't inevitable, right? It often stems from misaligned objectives, from poor communication, or even unclear identity frames. But with intentional design of shared goals, with structured interaction and really inclusive identity strategies, as a manager, you can shift teams from competitive in silos to collaborative engines of, competitiveness and org success. So let's wrap up. Let's take a moment to wrap everything up that we've covered on group and intergroup relations, because as we've seen, the dynamics between people don't just influence the workplace, but really shape the workplace. So we started with the basics. What is a group? Why do people join them? Whether it's for connection, support, or purpose, understanding the types of groups, formal groups, informal groups, task-based or relational, it helps us appreciate some of the social structures that we all move within at work. Then we looked at group structure. So how do roles, norms, status, size, and cohesiveness maybe fuel team success, or on the flip side, quietly sabotage it? And I really encouraged you to think about what role you naturally play in your own groups. Are you task focused? Do you build harmony? Or do you, ever notice tendencies that might unintentionally hold a team back? Next, we talked about effectiveness in groups, right? What makes a work group effective? It's not just about productivity, but it's about whether people feel fulfilled and whether they want to work together again. That comes down to effort, skills, and strategy teams use to get the work done. But it also depends very heavily on social dynamics and how well leaders can actually create the right conditions and the right environment for success. And then finally, we zoomed out to explore intergroup behavior. So how departments, teams, and divisions relate to one another. We talked about what gets in the way, right? Things like conflicting goals, silos, and even anxiety about the other group. But we also explored how superordinate goals, intergroup contact, and shared identity can break some of those barriers down and unlock powerful collaboration across teams. Now, final reflection, I want you to walk away from this chapter with this thought. The way that we lead and participate in groups, both within and between them, can either build a culture of trust and shared purpose, or can reinforce division and competition. So as future managers, as future HR professionals, team leads, project collaborators, you will be in positions to influence how groups form, how they function, and how they work together. And that's a big responsibility, but also a powerful opportunity. Thank you.